Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Yes, sir. Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you're going to get.
This offense just in general. I mean, you had a guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man, all the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of the HawksZone Rundown with Armac and B. Rice. Today on the show, we're going to have Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever. He's got a popular podcast that you guys got to go check out and have a listen. It's really good stuff. You can find all that on YouTube and anywhere you get your audio. With Dan, we're going to look at obviously the newest head coaching hire for the Seattle Seahawks, Mike MacDonald. We're going to dive into that, get his impressions, what he thought of the press conference, and then looking forward to coaches that might be on his radar for both for offense coordinator, defense coordinator, and all that stuff. Then we're going to dive into sort of the free agents who he thinks might look good in Seahawks colors, and who might be out the door as well. And then we're going to dive into the draft a little bit, just get his thoughts on who he thinks might be a good fit coming up in this upcoming draft. So B. Rice, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Just finished watching Senior Bowl and, watched that for the third time through. Definitely saw some guys I think that could fit this new regime in that game. And the one thing I will say is the quarterbacks in that Senior Bowl really underwhelmed, and I don't think helped themselves. And I think in totality really showed that there is a massive gap between the top three guys we constantly talk about in Williams, Daniels, and May, and then the rest of that class. And so I think that's going to really change how maybe John Schneider and Mike MacDonald attack the QB of the future question for the Hawks going forward.
How much weight do they put on the Senior Bowl? I know it's a big event and all this kind of stuff, but obviously you got film on a guy who's played in college games for at least a couple of years and all this kind of stuff. And then you get the Senior Bowl. If a guy has an off, weekend or week or whatever at the Senior Bowl, does it affect his stock much? Or like if you're the top guy, like if you're Drake May or Caleb Williams, does it really matter? Or if it's more of your say a Spencer Rattler and you're trying to fight up for maybe a day one pick and you just show out?
If you're one of the top three guys, like Williams, May, and Daniels, didn't attend, and I don't think some of them can because they don't fit the senior classification at least. But what it does for a lot of valuers, like I know John Schneider in his time as the Seattle GM has put a lot of stock in the Senior Bowl, mainly for the fact that you're now surrounded around a bunch of NFL coaches, NFL terminology, how to run an NFL offense. And for a quarterback, at least, it does help and drop your stock, because one thing that you could see with a couple of guys, Sam Hartman, Joe Milton, they really struggled making multiple progression reads. Like if it wasn't there on that first read for them, which is what they were used to in college, you could see the panic kind of set in. They made some errant throws, but overall, like it helps your stock, and it also doesn't do a whole lot. Like if you're a top guy that's going in the top 15 and you're at Senior Bowl, people will give you credit for doing Senior Bowl and be like, yeah, you know what? It's really great that he went in, continued to compete, did all these things, but mainly it's the interviews. It's the off-field things of getting to know these players that they use a lot of this for, because they still have their pro days coming up. They still have the NFL Combine coming up. So there's still other things to help move your stock more or less. And we both know that the tight, short competition in the Combine, somehow someone's stock always goes shooting through the roof because they run the 40-yard dash as one of the fastest guys to ever do it. And all of a sudden they're a first-round pick, even though they may not meet the rest of the things that are required of them as in the position group they are. Like, prime example is John Ross, fastest 40. The dude wasn't a number one first round receiver coming out. He was like maybe a day two pick if you want. Like he was never going to be a bona fide number one. And you look at the guy's career, but because he ran a fast 40, all these GMs get all hyped up about the guy and they go reach for him in the draft.
Yeah, I remember when we had Lofa on, I remember talking about that. We brought up the 40 and just how there's just so much emphasis on that. So that's just an example of, you kind of show out and you put on, a record time, it's like because of the hype, it's like you can't ignore it as a GM. So you sort of reach for a player like that and say, you know what, with that kind of speed, we could make this guy a number one, even though when you get on the football field, man, you got to have so many more intangibles than just, track speed. So obviously it's a speed game, but if you don't have all those other things, it really just doesn't matter. He could be a really good special teams guy or something, but yeah, so that's an example. And but yeah, so it's going to be interesting. We'll talk to Dan about that, what his impressions were, and what he thinks about some of those things coming up next. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. With us today is Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever podcast. Dan's got a super popular podcast that you guys got to go check out. Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on and hanging out with us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to chop it up with a couple of Seahawk fans, especially on what is, I guess, our first Sunday in 5 or 6 months without NFL football. So, better to do this than nothing at all.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, you get the week in between the Super Bowl. You do have the Pro Bowl stuff going on, but I mean, some people don't really count that. So,
yeah,
but why don't we dive right into it? Obviously, huge news the last few days with the hiring of Mike MacDonald, and finally got our guy. And sat down, and John and Mike had their big press conference. What were your first impressions from the press conference and really getting to hear Mike kind of sit down in front of the Seattle media?
The press conference itself was kind of surreal because, it just, you knew it was going to happen, but just seeing the reality of somebody else being behind that microphone, sitting next to John, with the coach's title it was weird. Right. And, love Pete. I'd said on the show as far back as early November, I thought it was time for a change. I didn't think it would happen this offseason, but when it did, it hadn't really sunk in until that press conference. And I think the reason it hadn't is because then you just get caught up in the excitement of what's going to happen next. And so the process leading up to the press conference, that those 2.5 weeks was, just constant excitement for people who talk about it like we do and love it the way we love it. I've said for a long time, I actually like this time of year better than the regular season as a fan, and especially as someone who creates content and talks about this kind of stuff, because the season gets a little repetitive. You're rehashing the last game. You're looking ahead to the next game. You're doing previews. You're looking at stats. The team building aspect of this thing and how you try to put a roster together and find lightning in a bottle and build a championship team is what really gets me going. And so now that there's change, it's a whole uncharted course, right? And I think the way John went about doing this, once I realized he was doing it the right way, once I got past the nervousness of they're just going to make a quick decision, they're going to go with the easy choice, right? I got really excited about it. So it was weird. I had to watch the press conference twice, kind of, to really absorb it. But I could not be more impressed. I honestly think, biased as I am, I know, but I try to be as objective as possible. I think we got the best guy in the cycle. I do. I think we got a superstar in the making. And if John gives him the right tools, I think the sky's the limit. I think you talk about in player terms when we're looking ahead to the draft. You look at upside, right? And I think as a head coaching candidate, the upside of Mike MacDonald is immense.
So speaking of like the candidates that we did have in this job cycle, Dan, where was Mike initially for you at the beginning and through that entire process of John going through this elaborate search and spreading this wide net? Because we heard about MacDonald at the beginning saying they were interested, and then it kind of disappeared and no one was really saying anything.
Yeah.
So what was your list of candidates like from the beginning of the job search after Pete got let go to when they finally named Mike MacDonald the head coach?
So the day after Pete was fired, I did a top 5, and I had MacDonald at 5, and it was based strictly on, didn't know much about him other than what he had done as a coordinator in Baltimore the last 2 years and just the buzz about him as a candidate. But Ian Rappaport by then had come out with that initial report that Dan Quinn and Mike MacDonald were 2 guys high on the Seahawks list that they wanted to talk to. And then we didn't hear anything else about Mike MacDonald for about a week, and that was a little confusing. And then we saw some reporting about, we didn't learn right away how the process worked and the fact that they missed their window to interview him the first time because of the new rules. So he was 5 initially, and then I did another list about 10 days into it, and I still had Ben Johnson number 1. I mean, I think most of us did. That was the guy that we just thought he'd be a perfect fit for the personnel we have on offense, and that we'd have a shot at him. But I'd moved MacDonald up to 2 in a tie with Mike Vrabel, who at the time there was a lot of buzz growing when I made that list. Peter King was doing his thing, and all those guys were kind of pounding the table for Mike Vrabel to Seattle. So I had them in a tie at 2. And then last Saturday, I got some information from a sort of a secondhand contact I have that there was a real shot that MacDonald was the favorite. And this was before they had met with him. And so I actually went on the record and made my prediction that he'd be the guy. And that was before I'd done anything else other than read about him, went and, found a couple interviews with him on YouTube, found him to be a little dry. Right. So I wasn't sure. But I, like I said, I couldn't be more pleased. And you just see the reaction from around the league and other guys that have worked with him, played for him, played against him, coached with him. It's phenomenal. It's universal. This guy is really respected.
Yeah. No. I was just gonna say, we had Ben on our list too as number 1, like you said, like a lot of people did. Mainly because we just, you look at the league and it's such an offensive minded league now. You look at sort of a lot of the past Super Bowl winning teams, a lot of offensive minded head coaches, and then you look at our own division with McVay and Shanahan, and you're like, we got to go toe to toe. We got to match this. We need our young offensive mind. But then, like you said, when you kind of take a step back and you look at Mike MacDonald and you listen to him in the press conference, and then you look where he came from, that Ravens organization, the Harbaughs, his years, then the time in Michigan too, and just the way he put a defense together there. And then you kind of take a step back and say, hey, why don't we get back to slowing these teams down? And a guy like this, a young guy that can grow, and that's sort of then you start getting excited. You really started getting excited about this guy, and you could see the confidence and just that he obviously had a vision sitting there with John. And then you look at this guy and be like, you know what? John probably thinks I could work with this guy for years to come and we could build something. And then when you think about it, like, because we thought at first, let's get a complementary defense with a dynamic offense, like we have the dogs to do it. But our defense has been just so poor the last 5, 6, 7 years, just the downward trend, that maybe it's time to get this thing back on track, and really get back to Seahawk defense. So I'm excited. I'm excited in that sense. So just kind of touching on that, what do you grade Schneider just with the overall process throughout the coaching find? Because like you said, they could have just got someone and got the safe pick.
Dan Quinn. Yeah.
Dan Quinn. And I guess another question on top of that would be, would you have waited? Would you have waited if Ravens were playing next weekend?
Sure sounds like it. He kind of dodged that question the other day. And am I 100% sure? I don't know. And what I loved about that press conference too is John didn't even try to. A lot of times these teams, like the Commanders, are doing it now, right? You don't get your guy, and so you have to settle for plan B or C, and then you have to spin it. And I think Dan Quinn is going to be a successful head coach. I think he would have been a fine choice. but he wouldn't have excited the fan base, right? And I think John, you saw it in the press conference. He was beaming. I've never seen that dude light up like that. And I've seen him lit up, if you know what I mean. His face was red. He could not stop smiling. We haven't even seen him smile like that after some drafts that he's nailed. Like, but he didn't shy away from it either. He said right there in the press conference with Mike MacDonald sitting right next to him that, like, we flew to Detroit and we were hoping the Lions would lose too. Like, I think Ben Johnson might have been their first choice. But then I think that where that smile came from is he had gotten intel. He had heard how well MacDonald was interviewing from people he knows around the league. He talked about that. He obviously liked what he did with the defense there. But that smile was like puppy love. It was like a guy who just fallen hard, right? He didn't realize until he got in front of Mike MacDonald, wow, this is my guy. This is absolutely my guy. And just the way that all came about. And you're right. It's a concern. We're doing it right now. Who the hell is the offensive coordinator? We thought we would have heard by now, right? Like MacDonald said, sooner rather than later. A lot of the good candidates, one of the costs of waiting to get MacDonald is you lost out on some guys. And, the initial reports of Ryan Grubb, and now we don't know if that's hit a snag. It sounds like Jimmy Sexton might be trying to hardball and really get some money out of the Seahawks on this thing. And so maybe they're looking another direction. That is a concern with going defense and a lot of fans hate that about this pick. They would have felt more comfortable with an offensive guy. I'll say this. The pool of offensive candidates wasn't great.
No.
It was Ben Johnson, and then it was Mike Kafka and Bobby Slowick. And clearly Slowick interviewed at 6 places and nobody felt he was ready yet. I was higher on Kafka than most, but it did make sense to go with a young offensive guy pairing with a veteran defensive coordinator because there's more of those out there. But you got to get the best guy. And what I say to people that are concerned about the offensive coordinator spot is, yeah, it can go badly, but I trust John Schneider to make the right choice and to use the same process he just did to get a head coach. And B, if you're worried about your offensive coordinator getting poached every couple of years for head coaching jobs, probably means your offense is doing pretty good.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of my whole thing with it. Like, I look at this MacDonald hire, and you've heard some people say it's like McVay a few years ago when he got hired by the Rams. He had kind of had a couple years as a coordinator there with the Commanders after coming up through the organization, and then goes off. The thing for me that I really like that they've done so far is bringing in Leslie Frazier. Now you've brought in a veteran guy, like a sounding board, not a DC type, just the assistant head coach, to kind of be that sounding board for Mike. Hey, I've been a head coach before. I've been in the league 15 years. These are some of the things you want to avoid. This is how you have to deal with certain ups and downs and ebbs and flows. So I love that hire. For me, I saw your post about Ryan Grubb, and actually I followed up with Whitney last night on Twitter, who broke the news,
right.
Mike MacDonald news and everything, and kind of brought up the Ryan Grubb news. She said she hasn't heard anything negative, but she said it's kind of they're just working things out. So along the lines of what you said, Dan, with Sexton down there, I would love to see Ryan Grubb come back to Seattle, because everything I've heard is that a lot of teams have tried to already pull him out of college and bring him in as an offensive coordinator. And I've heard, certain people going, well, if you look at, Penix's system last year, it was predetermined reads. It was this, it was like Rob Staten was going on about it. But I also look at what Ryan Grubb was able to do in, hey, we're going to run the ball. If we're in a game, we got to run the ball. We're going to run the ball. And I don't think because if we bring Ryan Grubb in, that means Michael Penix is a shoo-in to be the Seahawks draft pick. I don't believe that at all.
Nope.
But I like the fact you're bringing in a innovative offensive mind. And I don't think he would be the type where he'd immediately get poached for a head coaching job in a year or two. I could see him being here for a while. Because one thing that Mike said in his presser that really stuck with me is, I want someone to come in, run the offense, make it the Seahawk offense, and spearhead this for years to come. So I think that's maybe part of that, maybe negotiation is, hey, this is like, don't show up here for a year and then try and parlay this into a head coaching job.
Yeah.
I need to see that you're going to be committed to staying here for 4 years and really building this thing out.
Yeah, I'm with you. And everything I've learned about Ryan Grubb as well is the offense we saw at UW wasn't the offense he's always run. That earlier in his career, he had a team that ran for 2,000 yards, and he has experience coaching offensive lines, and so he has that mentality as well. And you'll find out after, at some point, whether it's this opportunity or not, when he and Kalen DeBoer go different ways, how much one influenced the other, because sometimes you just don't know. I'm down with it. Yeah, I saw that report too. Albert Breer said the NFL has been vetting this guy for a long time, and that's just not the direction he wanted to go. For people that think this is done, and you talk about the Twitter stuff, and I reached out to Whitney this morning as well, and she's trying to get a hold of her guy today and see if there's anything new. It's, I kind of tongue in cheek, half jokingly, I think the way I wrote the tweet the other day was according to sources of my sources, because I had two people that I knew, Whitney being one of them, that knew people close to the situation that were sure that this was going to happen. So of course I'm going to say that on Twitter.
Yep.
And the backlash was,
oh God, I saw
hilarious.
it. I saw it, Dan.
Just ridiculous, and I finally told one person, I said, look, I'm not a professional reporter. If I was, I wouldn't just tweet something like that. I would vet it through my own sourcing and make sure that I was, covered. I'll say this, until you see an announcement, for those doubting that Grubb's going to happen now, until you see an announcement that from the University of Alabama or Ryan Grubb himself, that he's either reached a new deal or they extended his contract or they sweetened his deal or I'm not going anywhere, it's not done. It's not over. Because if it was, he would be making that statement 100%. With everything and that staff's gone through, and Kalen DeBoer and moving to Alabama and all the backlash and all the guys that have transferred out and how stressful that must be right now and the pressure there, they wouldn't be letting this thing just hang in the air like that. So I still think he's, as Whitney put it, the leader in the clubhouse, but they're obviously exploring their options. And we heard the Kafka news yesterday. I find it interesting. You mentioned Leslie Frazier. If they, they handed him that assistant head coach title, if they had maybe just called him a senior advisor,
yep,
they might have been able to offer, you know what I mean? And they could have maybe worked around the Giants' ability to block Kafka. But yeah, I'm still intrigued by Tanner Engstrand also. But he knows he's the succession plan in Detroit. Yeah. And at some point, Ben Johnson's going to leave. He may prefer that spot. He's shown a penchant in his career to be patient. But yeah, I still think, if I'm not a betting guy, but if I put money on it, I still think Grubb's going to happen.
And that's kind of how I feel too. Like, you look at his Twitter page, there's no Alabama stuff on it. The last thing that's been posted is his farewell to Washington. As far as I understand, with people that I know at Washington, he didn't want to go. He wanted to actually be the succession to DeBoer, and they get fish. Yeah. He didn't want to leave Washington. His family really liked it here in the Seattle area and everything like that. And at the same token, from my understanding, he hasn't even signed a contract in Alabama yet to be their OC.
I've heard similar things, but then I've also heard people, referencing his salary. So yeah.
So it'll be interesting. But I agree with you, Dan, is that he's not off the table until there's some sort of official, hey, he's at Alabama now for the next 6 years as our offensive coordinator. So yeah, no, my fingers are crossed that we get Grubb, because I think he'd be a great pairing, especially with potentially drafting a QB of the future this year or next year. You look at his track record; he's done a phenomenal job with Jake Haener, Penix, and you even look at like Dylan Morris that was in Washington. Like, he even grew up quite a bit and has credited Grubb with a lot of success. And his O-line history is, something that's also probably welcomed here in Seattle with our struggles at that positional group.
I like how outside the box it is too. I think it indicates, what John's mentality is going to be. And just to tie that up, you talked about, defense over offense. Pro sports are always cyclical. Always. We see it in baseball, pitching dominates for a while and then things kind of regress back to the mean and then offense grows it. And we've seen this offensive revolution with these young minds in football, especially in our division, right? At some point, the league's going to adjust and they're going to find guys that figure out how to slow those offenses down. Clearly, that was a blind spot for Pete Carroll. He just couldn't. They remade the entire roster the last 3 years specifically to try to be better equipped to defend the 49ers and Rams, and it got worse. And
Yeah.
so that's, Mike MacDonald, I think, was targeted not just for that reason, but he has proven that he can devise schemes and execute a plan to slow those offenses down. And until you can do that, there was not going to be any chance that the Seahawks were going to get back in that division race. And so I think you're going to see it around the league a little bit. I mean, 5 of the 8 coaches hired were defensive guys, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
5 of the 8. So, yeah.
No, you bring up a good point. So just wrapping up the coaching stuff here. Just get your thoughts on the importance of the hire of Leslie Frazier coming in, and just kind of that veteran presence for MacDonald. Obviously, they have ties. He's been a head coach, also has had top 5 defenses in this league. So just kind of touch on that, and just having that veteran guy that has that experience to help Mike out there.
What was it Schneider said at the top of his press conference the other day? He said that one thing that impressed him about MacDonald is he was a learning networker and not a climbing networker, something like that. He didn't reach out to meet and take advice from other coaches just to climb the ladder. He did it because he wanted to get better and he wanted to learn things, right? I think bringing Leslie Frazier on is a sign of, I think it confirms that. And it shows that this guy doesn't have an ego, because I think one thing that kills head coaches over time is stubbornness. And we've seen it twice in Seattle. It's what ended the Mike Holmgren era. The league adapted to that West Coast offense and they figured out how to defend it. And he didn't have an answer for it because he just refused to adapt. And I think we saw that from Pete on the defensive side of the ball the last couple of years, as I mentioned. And so for MacDonald to bring in a guy like Leslie Frazier, who's been one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL for a long time, and is a name, it just shows that he doesn't care about being the guy, right? Being the man. And it's my corner office and I have final say. He even said it in the press conference. He said, once he determines a defensive coordinator, he said, I'm calling the plays year 1 because we got to establish this thing, get it rolling. But if a guy is ready, I'm going to hand it off to him. I thought that was, to me, the best moment of the press conference. Just really
was.
Yeah. Blew me away when he said that.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost reminiscent with the Wade Phillips and McVay when McVay first came in, right? You kind of have that name, so, and if Mike kind of transcends anywhere where McVay's gone, then, we'll take it. Right. So, so, because you even look at the Rams last year, everybody counted them out before the season even started, and look, then he gets them in the playoffs. Right. So, and, Bryce and I mean, we agree that was coaching, and that's just an example that you brought up, how Pete has got exposed in our own division year after year. You try to revamp especially the run defense, right? That was the biggest thing. You're just like, hey, they're doing it. They're getting rid of everybody. And now look at these guys they're bringing in, big money Draymond Jones. And it felt worse, right? Just because of the money you spent and what you tried to do. And it was exactly the same. And that's when you really knew it was time for a change, and that's how we look at it. You love Pete, but 14 years, it's a long run, right? It's a really long run. So, we're excited about this. So just moving ahead here, just on the field stuff or player wise, given the lack of cap space the Hawks have coming into the offseason here, who are some of the players? I mean, there might be a few obvious ones, but that you think will just not be on this roster come training camp?
You start with the obvious ones. You can kind of start at the bottom of the roster, guys like Brian Monet. That's an easy $6 million right off the top. And I'm not saying that Brian Monet might not be someone that they would look at. If he's 100% healthy, they don't have a true zero tech. They don't have a true nose tackle on this roster right now. And so that might be something that's appealing to them, but not at $6 million a year. And I suspect he's probably done playing football. I've heard some whispers that knee injury, there's a reason he missed the whole year. It wasn't just a clean ACL tear. It was more extensive than that. So, but that's an easy $6 million. Guys like Nick Bellore save you 2.8, his roster spot. I've been pissed off about that for for years. A
I'll
guy
join you, Dan.
yeah, it's, good in the locker room, great. Special teamer, great. You can find those guys at a lot less than $2.8 million. So, and then to me, I think one of the first moves that we're going to see, well, I won't say, maybe not chronologically, but importance wise, is whenever they can do it, whether they designate it post June 1 or not, is Jamal Adams is not going to be on this roster. I think Jamal Adams was a Pete Carroll guy. I think he was behind the trade. I think in a vacuum and with autonomy, that's probably not a deal that John Schneider makes. He values his draft picks too much, right? And the positional value just wasn't there. So, I've run a bunch of scenarios, and there's an easy path to $40-50 million, between $40 and $50 million in cap space, without even touching Geno Smith's contract. So then you get into some real possibilities, and then you can, and that's not. Now I'm not talking about even restructuring DK Metcalf's. That's an easy way to get some cap space too. But the obvious ones are those two. And then Will Dissly is another one I would put in that category. A guy who's primarily a blocking tight end, who's not even involved in the passing game, although a new coordinator might have different plans, but a $7-ish million cap hit or cap savings, a $10 million cap hit, but you save about $7 million by cutting him. That's an easy one. And then we got to find out what Tyler Lockett wants to do. Does he want to keep playing football? If he doesn't, then he can actually work with the team on how retirement would look and kind of move some things around that way. But I'm not as worried about the cap situation as some people are, because the way that John Schneider and Matt Thomas structure contracts, they've put themselves in a good position here where they can make some moves that won't really impact the roster that much. The biggest question mark I have is I just don't know where I land on Quandre Diggs. He's in the last year of his deal. You can save, I think, $10-ish million off the top of my head by cutting him. But he might be a guy that Mike MacDonald might value. And he might want, there's not a lot of veteran presence on that side of the ball if you talk about maybe Bobby not coming back, right? Quandre might be a guy that still has some value to Mike MacDonald. So I'm not as quick to cut him when I do these simulations as some other fans are. And then we'll find out about Bobby. I tend to think with a young, progressive defensive mind like MacDonald, there probably is not a fit here for Bobby Wagner. We've seen the last of him, I think.
Hey, real quick for Bryce, I'll let you chime in real quick. I just wanted to touch on you mentioned a possible restructure with DK. What just elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, is that something that obviously he's the number one guy here. Like, I rave about DK every week on this pod, but is that I never thought about that. So is that something that you see happening, or something that he would be willing to do, or what are your thoughts on that? Just expanding on that a bit.
Again, I might put that in a category of, we'll find out how John feels about him. We're gonna see which players were Pete guys and which guys were John guys. But I'm with you. I'm in the same boat. There was a period about halfway through last season where it became a popular notion to talk about whether it would make sense to trade him. I think some people even wanted to consider that at the trade deadline last year. And you could probably get a nice package for DK. But then I think the second half of the season last year, he really showed, for anyone who was doubting him from that Dallas game on, really how dominant he can be. And in a very quiet way over his first 3-4 years in the league, he's put himself in some pretty heady company as far as yards and touchdowns and catches that only, Hall of Famers and future Hall of Famers are lumped in with. I think he's on his way to having a Mike Evans type career, right? Restructures can be done in a couple different ways. He's young enough that you could simply add a couple of years onto the end of his deal if he really sees himself here long term. And you can do that and spread out the bonus hit, right? Or you can simply convert salary to bonus. And that's a simple conversion. They did it with Tyler last year. I think that's what they did with Jamal last year as well, which increases your dead cap hit in future years. But it clears up cap space up front. And I don't have it here in front of me. I've looked at it before, though, but whatever his base salary is listed at, you can't do the whole thing, but you can take a portion of that, more than half of it. It's a significant portion of it, and just pay it to him today, which is why players usually agree to this. oh, I get the money now. And then you just turn it into a bonus, but then you have to take that amount and spread it out over the remainder of the deal. So you do increase future years, but that would be a very simple way that they could create some more space if they wanted to. And they do need some. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Dan, I agree with you on a lot of the guys you're talking about that are going to probably end up being cap hits. It looks even weirder on social media right now with Jamal. Have you seen his Instagram posts that he's
Yep.
kind of been putting up? Like, I
Yeah.
wonder if he's not going to retire. It's kind
It's,
of giving
yeah.
vibes of it.
Somebody pointed that out to me, so I went and looked for it. I hadn't been following him on Instagram, but it was a long, long story that he put together. So you can't see it now; it's gone,
Yeah,
and it included pictures and videos of his entire football career, going back to high school, and it even looked like maybe younger than that.
yeah.
Then through college, and then the Jets and the Seahawks. He didn't have any texts, nothing written. It was just like a career retrospective.
Kind of gave me some weird vibes.
Yeah. I mean, the guy, if he's taking care of his money, he should be financially set for life. It's if he can't play at the level that he thinks he can, or if he gets the indication that if he were cut, there wouldn't be anything else out there for him. Who knows? Maybe, the team may have already communicated to him also that they might be moving on from him. And so he might just be pondering life after football. But yeah, sometimes players' social media behavior is a sign of things that are happening. Players will scrub their social media
Yeah.
sometimes with all references to teams and things like that. We saw it with Jared Kelenic a couple of years ago with the Raiders. Sometimes that's legit, and sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, and there are real issues. So
I would be very interested in the Quandre thing. So that's one of the guys I've been toying with. Like me and Armac have gone back and forth on guys we'd cut. Like Monet, Disley, Ballore, and Adams are like just locks across the board for me. Like that's easy money to clear out,
Yep.
get some savings back. The DK restructure is kind of an interesting one because, like you were saying, his base salary is 13 million, so you could take a chunk of that, spread it out, which would be good. Geno's is the one I'm really interested in
Yeah.
because of February 16th and how much he's due to make. Like, do they? And so we had Jackson Bevan on from Cigar Thoughts, and one thing I thought of is if you're not sold on this quarterback class as John Schneider and Mike MacDonald, do you extend Geno, lessen his cap hit, but still he gets his money, give him 2 more years? It extends your quarterback window, in my opinion, because Geno is playing as a top 12 quarterback, roughly in the NFL, statistically speaking. And it gives you a little bit more of a chance of not necessarily rushing into a draft pick of maybe someone that you don't want, where you just press into it, and gives you a little bit more cap flexibility. Because like Quandre, like you said, he's saves you 11 million post June, pre June, doesn't really matter. I feel like his play the last couple of years in Pete's defense went down from when he got his contract extension. He wasn't the playmaker he usually is, ball hawking the ball, and almost felt like, especially when Jamal was in last year, I felt watching him, he was trying to make up for Jamal's inability to play in coverage and in space when he did play. Once Julian went in, Quandre started to look more like Quandre again. So, yeah, no, Quandre last year of his deal, is it worth it really to cut it, or is it worth just to play it out and then it's off your books completely? Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to kind of see how that all shapes up. But the other player I'm kind of wondering about, what do you do? Like if you bring back Leonard Williams, is there potential of something going on with Draymond Jones? Because he was such I wouldn't say a disappointment, but didn't meet the expectations I think a lot of people had with the amount of money Seattle threw at him, what he had done in Denver. And then coming in this year, I think part of it was Uchenna getting hurt. He had to play out of position a lot of the year.
Yeah.
What is your take on Draymond Jones this season, and what do you think kind of goes on with him going forward?
It was obviously a disappointment, when you pay a guy $51 million and it was the biggest free agent contract that the Schneider Carroll regime ever handed out. You expect more out of him. I think he's just 26 years old, right? You expect some of that upside to be unlocked. And I tend to, I'm not going to overreact on the season he had. I think he played better at the end of the year, certainly, and there were flashes. I would like to see what Mike MacDonald can do with him. I think, you add some pieces around him on that roster. you put him in a position to succeed, because the pass rush upside especially is there, and it's legit, and those guys are hard to find. And the cap savings this year versus a dead cap is so minimal if you trade him. I think it's only 3 or 4 million if you're looking at it. Heck no. You know, it's because you trade him unless you're not going to get a comparable guy back. Now you're hunting for more defensive linemen, whereas I'm in the school of thought of, you keep Draymond, you have Jaron Reed coming back on the last year of his deal. You find a way somehow to bring Leonard Williams back, and then you still add to that. You have to. They got to get deeper up front.
Yeah.
And so I want to see what he can do there. And that's kind of how I feel about Quandre too. I sort of want to see how he would look in a Mike MacDonald defense, because I think a lot of what we know now about the Seahawks defense and what people see on tape, and you compare and contrast it with what happens in Baltimore, and the language that MacDonald uses and people use to describe that defense is that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and they're always in the right place at the right time. How much of what we view as Quandre Diggs, backsliding performance-wise, was other guys blowing coverages, Reek Woolen really struggling in his second year, and Diggs having to try to make up for all that as the center fielder. And I don't know. I kind of, if there's a way that they can manipulate the cap to do all the other things we need to do, and there are, I'd like to see Diggs back.
Yeah. You know what? The fact that Mike's coming to a team who, like Bryce and I talked about, there's not a lot of teams that are 9-8 looking for a new head coach to just make the playoffs. You know what I mean? So he's coming to a situation where there's so many pieces to this team. Usually it's a rebuild, or like, the Commanders, they got a top 2 pick, whatever. But you're coming to a situation where there's like, you got a lot of wait and see kind of guys. Like, it'd be nice to see how Mike MacDonald has a year with some of these guys. Draymond Jones, you mentioned Woolen, we were all super excited about him after his rookie year. Obviously, you look at him and it's like, what he was doing out there, he was lost, the tackling, the coverage. A guy like Mike MacDonald could turn that around. You got a guy that runs a 4.2. He's long, the kind of guys Pete used to like on the corner there. So you kind of get excited again with, like, okay, you know what? Like, obviously Witherspoon's a freak of nature, and he was the guy. But now on the other side, maybe a Mike MacDonald can get him going again, and Draymond Jones, and just take these guys' strengths, and a Diggs. You got the veteran. So yeah, it's like, maybe it would be different if Pete was back and you'd be like, yeah, Diggs is gone. I don't know about Woolen. Maybe he comes off the bench, whatever, because that it would be the same thing. So that's kind of the wait and see and exciting part, because you're like, we have pieces. So then I guess just moving forward with it, you look at the free agents on the Ravens, and Mike leaves, and you mentioned adding. So you kind of look there. Is there anybody that kind of excites you there for added depth, and guys that you think might come over and follow Mike? And is there anyone that kind of stands out in that team that you like to see, maybe especially on the defense there?
I mean, the obvious one is Justin Madubuike, but they're gonna franchise tag him. He's not hitting the open market at all. And then the other 2 guys are interesting. Well, there's a third guy too. Malik Harrison had a breakout year for them as sort of a hybrid kind of outside linebacker, edge guy. Even played some off-ball linebacker for them. Only 25 years old. He'll hit the open market. He might be a guy that MacDonald brings over just as a sort of a chess piece and just some depth. But everybody wants to talk about Patrick Queen, and they want to talk about Geno Stone. And it's such an interesting situation because Queen was drafted 1 spot behind Jordan Brooks. And, everybody that thought the Seahawks reached for Brooks, all the stories came out later that the Ravens would have taken him over Queen if he had been there 1 spot later. And this whole thing, which John alluded to at his press conference, how similar their scouting departments always seem to align. And now they both had their 5th-year options declined, and now they're both free agents. They're different players. Queen's a little bit smaller, a little bit more of a sideline to sideline guy. And it'll be an interesting decision. I think one of those 2 linebackers is in a Seahawks uniform next year, Jordan Brooks or Patrick Queen, and it's probably Mike MacDonald's call. Like, which guy does he see as a better fit, right? Because I don't know. You look at PFF projections and stuff, and they probably can. I don't know. Queen probably can command a little bit more on the open market. He's coming off the healthier year, the better year. Although I think Jordan Brooks played his best football for us last year, which is amazing coming off an ACL. And then it all depends on like how they see the draft board lining up too, and maybe how they can pair, who would pair better with some things that are available in the draft. So that's an interesting one. The Geno Stone thing, I know a lot of people had 7 interceptions this year, breakout performance from a 7th round draft pick at 25 years old. But we already have too much payroll locked up in our safeties. Even if you move on from Adams and Diggs, you got to balance that allocation of payroll out positionally again, right? So the idea of buying high on a guy and paying the freight for a guy like that who has a breakout year and adding him to what you're already paying Julian Love, and I don't think that one makes a lot of sense. I think there's some sneaky, quiet, young depth in the safety room for the Seahawks. And if Mike MacDonald's strength, as we keep hearing over and over, is putting guys in a position to succeed and getting the most out of players and developing players, then let's not focus so much on going and buying a bunch of free agents, but finding the next guy for a lot cheaper, right? So,
Well, and I agree with you on that, Dan, because I look at it like you were saying, the safety room, and I look at Kobe Bryant. He's similar size, build to a Geno Stone, and last year he kind of got lost. He got his toe injury and then lost the nickel spot to Witherspoon. And then they say, okay, we're moving you to safety. And then he never really got footing there. But when he was on the field, he still was a very good player. And I think with, like you said, a Mike MacDonald, who apparently great communicator, you look at what he did with that Baltimore defense in guys that aren't stars and made them into. Jadeveon Clowney looked like he had his best year as a pro. Kyle Van Noy, Geno Stone with these, career number and interceptions. So for me, I'd love to see Kobe Bryant get an actual opportunity to develop as a safety, because we had Lofa on, and Lofa was telling us that like Kobe Bryant's an extremely smart football player.
Yeah.
And there's a reason he was one of the top corners in college football opposite Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati. Let him go back there and play safety. And, maybe comes down to a point where in training camp, you might trade Quandre because you found out that Kobe Bryant's a better option for you. Like, it gives you a little bit more opportunity than going out and, like you said, spending money in a room that we need to get rid of allocations in a way of salary cap. Because, like, I feel with Pete, and this is one thing I didn't get to touch on earlier, though, you look at how Pete built defense. It was always back to front. Mm-hmm. He always built the back end forward. Mike McDaniel's the opposite. He wants to, or Mike MacDonald, I should say, is back or forward to back. He wants those trenches, the linebackers, all that, and then get to the secondary. And he had a Swiss Army knife in Kyle Hamilton. Now, I don't want people to think Witherspoon is now going to be Kyle Hamilton, because that's not going to happen. But he might use them in similar ways. But that's one thing. And like, I just look at it all together that I feel like there's players on this roster that were underutilized or not valued as much by Pete. And not because Pete didn't value them, but because I don't think Pete had the ability to get the most out of them in the way that they could have impacted our roster, where I feel like MacDonald and his new staff, especially like Leslie Frazier, I think we're going to see a massive change with some of the guys that we already had and go, wow, like, how did we not play him last year or 2 years ago? And you're going, part of it might have been the staff and having issues with actually developing the talent that we did have here. Because John Schneider, as we all know, has been an extremely good drafter of talent in those mid rounds.
Yeah. And I think it's a tale of two, segments of their tenure, right? Early in Pete's stay here, what were they known for? They were known for cultivating undrafted free agents and late round draft picks and developing players. I don't think players developed in the last couple of years, at least not on defense, and weren't getting the opportunity, like you say. And I'm 100% with you. Kobe Bryant was at the forefront of what I was talking about when I mentioned that. We got a glimpse of what he could do at safety in the preseason. And the one question I had about him is, could he be physical? And he hit some dudes, and that was fun to watch. And the weakness, the reason he couldn't stick at outside corner, he just didn't have that dynamic, explosive short area quickness. But I think he has all the makings of an outstanding safety. And so that was one of the guys. And then, we saw some flashes from Jarek Reed in the preseason last year when he got a chance to get some run. And then Jonathan Sutherland's a guy people forgot about, who spent the year on the practice squad. They had to cut him due to an injury, right before the beginning of the regular season, they were able to bring him back later. And he was a guy that was getting first team reps in OTAs and preseason, and people were raving about. And, it's kind of that Geno Stone profile, right, of a guy flying under the radar. So I'm with you on that. And the Clowney thing is interesting. You mentioned that in there. How fun would that be to see a reunion with him? Because the one thing I'm sure you guys love, Matty Brown and Griffin Sturgeon with those guys too on the Overload podcast. And Matty, after the hire, was adamant that current personnel on the defensive side of the ball for Seattle, assuming Leonard Williams is re-signed, I think he hedged it with that, fits what Mike MacDonald likes to do. They just need a little more size and length on the edge. And that's a healthy Jadeveon Clowney, if you ask me.
Yeah,
100%.
Absolutely. So kind of looking ahead a little bit, how do you think John Schneider and McDonald attack this upcoming draft? We're sort of right in the middle of the pack with the first round pick we have at 16. We don't have a second round pick. How do you think they go at it? And then what do you think their biggest need is coming into this draft? Is it the trenches? Are we looking at that QB, or is that maybe a day 2-3 thing, or is it at all?
Oh, I think it's a big deal. I think John wants to draft a quarterback badly. I think he has wanted to. I think every year at draft time when he tells us, what do we hear every year? Ron Wolf taught me you take a quarterback every single year. It just hasn't worked out for us. Well, that might be, Schneider speak for, because Pete would tap me on the shoulder and say, we don't need a quarterback here. I need something else. It's going to happen. You're rebuilding like they are with a young coach and thinking outside the box at offensive coordinator. He's got to identify his franchise guy. And I think he's taken a quarterback this year. Is it at 16 or is it at 10 or is it in the third round? I don't know. Ask me again after February 16th. And then again, as we get closer to the draft and we can start to connect some dots. But I also think that because it's a new coach, a new coaching staff, and because that coach may want certain qualities in a player or certain things that maybe don't exist on the roster or he wants more of, I do think that we're prime to see a classic John Schneider trade back and accumulate more volume draft. I do. Unless he absolutely falls in love with one of those quarterbacks and feels like he can't move off 16 and they'll just figure the rest of the roster out after the third round because he needs that guy. And so I just did a mock draft show this morning I posted where I did that. I traded back to 26 and picked up a couple of thirds, had like 4 picks in about a 20 pick range in that third, fourth round range. And to answer your question, yeah, you got to start up front. You need to stock the front 7 first, I think is a massive priority, linebacker and defensive line. And then the interior offensive line. I think that's where I start. And I double up and I get some redundancy there and I throw multiple bodies at it. That's where they just haven't focused on that enough in the draft the last couple of years. Right. And so with a guy like Mike MacDonald, he's going to want that. And quarterback's the question. I took one in the first round in my mock this morning. You can check it out at Seahawks Forever. But we'll see. It's going to be a fun couple of months for sure.
So speaking of the rookie quarterback class there, Dan, outside of Williams, Daniels, and May, who we all pretty much project are going to go within that top 10 kind of area, top 5 even. Out of the remaining quarterbacks, I don't know if you watched the Senior Bowl at all throughout the week. Mm-hmm. Where do you kind of rank your next 3 guys? And like, where do you see them possibly falling within, say, the end of day 1 to day 2 kind of area?
I'm really excited for the combine this year, and I hope all those guys throw. I really do. I was disappointed. The Super Bowl was a snoozer. I was really disappointed with some of the decisions around the quarterbacks. I understand Pennick's not playing. I was actually surprised that he practiced. National championship game wasn't that long ago, and he got beat up. And I thought with those ribs and whatever else he was battling that I thought he was going to opt out of the Senior Bowl. But he practiced and then opted not to play. Nix and only playing. Did he play 2 drives?
Yeah.
He played 2 drives. Spencer Rattler only playing 1 drive. Like, that's a guy that seemed to me that had the most to gain. I thought that was odd. I go back and forth on those guys. I haven't really dug into, heavy tape study on those three, but I made it a point this year to watch a lot more live college football than I have in a long time, just to see as much of those guys as I can. I've seen a ton of Penix living out here, and Penix to me is, I understand why teams are so split on him. Who was it? Bruce Feldman was on Eisen last week and said that scouts that he knows, some have told him he's a 3rd-round grade. Some have told him he may not be on their board because of the medical history. Others have him in the 1st round. It's when you separate the emotion of it, of living in this area, and so many people are Husky fans, obviously, even if they hire Ryan Grubb, and one of you said it right at the top of the show, means nothing. Schneider's gonna draft the guy he thinks can have the best career, period. Of those three, to me, and I like Bo Nix, I could see McVay being all over Bo Nix as a guy that would fit.
He fits that scheme, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a JJ McCarthy guy.
Oh, yay. Hello.
I think people that dismiss him, it's because they haven't seen it. Because of that offense and because of the structure and what Jim Harbaugh does. And it's not because he didn't trust him. Jim Harbaugh just said yesterday he thinks McCarthy will be the first quarterback taken when it's all said and done. He hasn't talked about a quarterback like this since he had Andrew Luck. And he said there are 2 people that he loves in the world, his wife and Andrew Luck. If McCarthy played in a spread system, he'd have been in the Heisman race. He'd have thrown for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. He has an elite arm. He might be the best athlete of the bunch outside of Jaden Daniels. His frame scares me a little bit, but he's not a guy that I'm playing day one either.
No.
I think his upside is immense. And as much as Penix can sit back and be a surgeon, I am a little concerned. He can move, but he doesn't have that kind of dynamic athleticism that you like in a quarterback in the NFL these days. And I think whether it's Geno Smith or Drew Lock or whoever it is as the bridge quarterback, I think John is going to fall in love with JJ's upside. And obviously Mike MacDonald had experience watching him day in, day out his freshman year. So there's that connection and the Harbaugh connection, of course. And it would surprise me if I was, on the meter, it would surprise me more that they don't take JJ McCarthy in this draft than if they do.
I'm actually right with you on that, Dan. I've been saying that for a while now. Like I'm a Husky fan and I watched Penix and stuff, but the one thing that was evident in that national championship, and me and Armac talked on our pod, and the thing I thought that was going to cause Washington to lose that game was inside pressure on Penix. He's fine when he's got a super clean pocket, but one of the things I always grade college quarterbacks when they come out is how do they handle chaos? Because the NFL pocket is always going to be chaos. And watching JJ, he played in a system that asked him not to do a whole lot because Jim Harbaugh, that's his system. It's always been that way. But translating that to the NFL, his ability to get out of the pocket, make plays, like if they draft JJ and trade back and get him in the late 1st, early 2nd, and they don't fortify that inside, maybe Bradford's still there and Olu's his center, but we're still kind of having issues. JJ can get out and extend something if he gets in trouble. I don't feel like Penix can do that enough and is durable enough to handle the hits, get out of bounds, get away from that. I agree with you. He makes great level 3 throws in college football, which I grade very highly for the NFL. And he's used to pro terminology. Jim Harbaugh does not run a non-pro system. He's going to have pro terms in there. He's going to do all that stuff. The other guy that I'd be okay with if they don't get JJ is Spencer Rattler. Same kind of thing with him down in South Carolina. And again, both of those guys, you don't start day one. You still have your bridge guy. And the thing, like you said with JJ, how young he is. He's only 21 years old.
Just turned 21, yeah.
We have a long time with that kid to develop him. And a lot of people, like you said, kind of shit on the kid. And it's like, you don't know what he was asked to do there. He was asked to manage the game, don't turn the ball over, lean on Blake Corum in that run game and that phenomenal defense they had. He's 27-1. And so there was one stat I actually pulled up on JJ, and it was 3rd down throws over +7. JJ was the most accurate passer in the country doing that with the highest upside going. I think he was almost 70% on plus 3rd and 7 throws in non-neutral situations. So times when teams know you're going to have to throw it.
Yeah.
That's a huge stat when you go into the NFL and being able to complete that high of a percentage of passes. So I'm with you, Dan. I'll be one of those guys to join you on that boat on JJ McCarthy, and we can deal with all the haters later on when he gets drafted.
Yeah. He also played on a at least half the season on a pretty badly injured ankle that would have kept some other guys out and severely limited his mobility. And there was even a question if he was going to be, 100% come playoff time. He was able to manage and get around a little bit, but no, I really hope, like I said, I hope he throws at the combine, but if it's there at the pro day, whatever, when people see him throw, it's easy, man. It's easy and it looks good. And, yeah, Rattler's an interesting one to me. I know Rob Staten's a big fan, and so that caught my attention. When I watched some all 22 of him 2 months ago, I thought his delivery looked a little high effort, but I was wrong. It was just what I was watching or whatever that day, because just watching Senior Bowl practices this week, and he's got a real confident release and some real arm talent there. I know there's some personality questions. He kind of reminds me, very reminiscent. If I comped him at all, it'd be Matt Corral a couple of years ago, a guy that I know the Seahawks were reportedly liked, and he's out of football now, just had some personal issues, but similar frame and release and kind of attitude issues that he had to sort of rein in. But it sounds like Rattler has matured and will be, a guy to look at, because there's the drop off. Thank you, NIL, I guess. This was going to be a much, much deeper quarterback class with some really interesting day 2 and 3 guys. And that, man, it drops off. It's basically Spencer Rattler, and if he's healthy, Jordan Travis. And after that, there's not much else, man. I used to like Sam Hartman, but he didn't do himself any favors yesterday, and I think he's really limited. So there's not much after that.
Yeah, we when we were talking to we had Jackson on, we talked about the exact same thing, how you're gonna, as the years go on, it's gonna be really hard to get really good NFL talent in the later rounds because of the NIL thing now.
Yep.
And especially at the running back position, you name it, right? Because you're that after the top guys, so that's going to be interesting to see. And then as far as, yeah, man, I agree with you on JJ as well. I think we just have a nice luxury right now with that bridge quarterback situation. So if Geno's back, because we were high on Anthony Richardson last year too. We thought 100% they were going to take him at 5 if Indianapolis didn't grab him.
They might have, yeah.
Yeah, we were like, and it would have just been when you look at him last year, a young guy that really hasn't learned the position yet. He just has so many tools and the ceiling so high, but he had to get thrown into the Wolves last year in Indy. Whereas he would have been sitting behind a Geno last year. And I just think it would have been great for him and for us. Because again, I just think it's such a lost art in the NFL now. Like you look what Green Bay's done with obviously their way of bringing quarterbacks in, and you look at Jordan Love now, how he sat behind for a couple of years. Aaron did the same thing with Favre, and I know it's tough. It's a win now league, but when you're an outsider looking in, sometimes like look at the Carolina situation, and you throw a guy like that, or like Bryce Young in the fire, and you're just like, you're just gonna get him killed, So it's kind of interesting. Dan, one final question for you. If you look ahead, with the new coaching regime, what would you kind of consider a successful season next year for the Hawks? Like, is it win totals? Is it just the way the style of play they got going? What would, at the end of the season, what would you consider, okay, this was a successful year?
I think, numbers aside, do we feel like the team is better in December than it was in August and September? Do we see the team grow? You want to try to replicate 2012? Like, do you feel like we all feel there's enough young talent on this roster that they're not that far away with better coaching? When you mentioned the Rams at the top of the show, going into the season, none of us took them seriously because we thought their defense was just Aaron Donald and 10 dudes, and they weren't going to be very good defensively. And they were, because they were coached well, right? And they got some value in the draft, and they found some gems. And I think that was the frustrating part for most of us last year, watching, especially the defense, but it applies to the offense too, that we just weren't getting the most out of the players that we had. And I think that was the most discouraging thing. It actually got worse. And that Pittsburgh game was rock bottom, you know? And so to me, whether it's 6 wins or 13 wins in December, if we feel like this is the right guy, the offensive coordinator is exciting, they're getting the most out of their players, and they go into the offseason, whether they make the playoffs or not, as a team that's feeling really good about themselves, and now we can contend in 2025, legit contend to win the division and chase championships. That's a successful season. There's always going to be a transition, and I know there are examples of guys that hit the ground running year one and win big. But I think the key here is we want this to be sustainable, right? And we want to send a message to the 49ers and Rams that, okay, it's not, things have changed. And so to me, that's it. The win total, I don't know, ask me again in 6 months, I may change my mind, right? Once we see kind of how things come together. But as I sit here today, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I agree that, I look at the 2011 season for the Seahawks when they kind of, the Legion of Boom started to form together at the end of that year. They went on that run, and yeah, they missed the playoffs. They finished 7-9. They missed the playoffs, but going into 2012, that defense had formed together. And I'm in the same kind of thought of you. Like, let's see Mike MacDonald's defense come together. Give him the first, half of the season to figure it out, get it all together. But I don't want to see the stagnant that was there last year and the last few years. Like, if they're hitting and they're flying around and they're exciting to watch, I'm going to be a lot happier as a Seahawks fan going, yes, our future is now a lot brighter than it would have been if the Pete Carroll regime was still here and we're still kind of turning our tires in the same mud that we've been stuck in for 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we want to see.
Yeah, and I agree too. I think I'm in the mindset of wins will take care of themselves. I think sometimes, I think what year was it? I think we had 12 wins, 2020 or
oh yeah,
whatever it was. But it just was like it didn't feel like that, And so for me, I'm just a believer of like you watch the games and you see, like you said, how are we in November? How are we in December? How are we attacking? How are we just the vibe out there? Like the way Witherspoon is, like, let's get the rest of the guys going like that, right? Just stuff like that. And then the wins will take care of themselves because they can sort of be misleading sometimes, right? So, and like you said, set it up for 2025. Like this is kind of a year to say, okay, let's see a change in direction. Like even Bryce and I have talked about, and they don't have the talent we have, but you look at Arizona and their culture changed with Gannon down there and the GM, and people are getting excited down there, and they can say, hey, and it's yet to be seen, but it seems like they got the Kyler situation kind of figured out, and there's a little more excitement down there. So I think, like you said, hey, let's reevaluate as far as a win total is concerned a few months down the road here. But yeah, I think we're in agreement with that. So, hey, Dan, we appreciate you coming on, man. It's awesome hanging out and talking with you and
absolutely
getting your insight. Where can people find you? We know you got the podcast, so just what else you got going on, and where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, the name of the show is Seahawks Forever. It's so check out the YouTube channel. That's kind of the emphasis, but I also publish audio episodes of the show on all the platforms as well. So just look for Seahawks Forever and follow me on Twitter. I'm always going to call it Twitter at Seahawks Forever also. And yeah, I do shows. Well, shoot, this time of year I've been doing them 4 or 5 times a week, just whenever I'm able, and join in the discussion. The growth of the channel's been pretty exciting, and especially this off season, man. People are I've had as many views in the last 30 days I think I did in the 6 months prior. Like, but it's just to kind of take things full circle. It's what we started the show talking about, right? It's off seasons had become kind of boring and predictable, and we kind of knew, and we heard the same old stuff all the time and looked for the same draft prospects every year, and we cared about arm length and all, that kind of stuff. And it's all different now and new, and that's, scary to some people, but it's, for guys like us, it's exciting. It's new possibilities. So there's a lot more to talk about. It's a lot of fun to do it.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we can get you back on in the future and talk Hawks again here.
Anytime. We'll have to flip that around too here soon when some things are settled on the coaching staff and we get a little clearer picture. And we'll have you guys come the other way and have you on my show.
That'd be awesome.
Absolutely,
Appreciate
Dan.
that. Okay, Dan.
Anytime.
All right, man. Sounds good.
All right, go Hawks.
All right,
Thanks,
go
guys.
Hawks. That was Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever podcast. Man, that was great insight by Dan. Having Dan on the show today.
No, 100%, man. It was nice to have Dan on. He's quite well connected, as our listeners probably could tell, with certain things going on. But no, Dan, the one thing I do appreciate, for me at least, is I'm not the only one sitting on the JJ McCarthy to Seattle Seahawk.
Right.
You're kind of chugging along in a circle. I got Dan now sitting.
There you go.
And honestly, as our listeners know, and people that view the show, like, we're going to bring you guys the best guests that we can, that have the most insight, that may align with ours or may differ from ours. So it was nice to have a guy come on where Dan's a bit of both. He has his perspective on certain things that may be different, but at the same time, we align on a lot of things. And I look forward to having him back in the future.
Yeah, you know what? One interesting thing that stood out for me, amongst a couple other things, but just when we were talking about free agents and just restructuring guys and all that kind of stuff, and he brought up DK Metcalf, and he loves DK just like I do. You know how I rave about him all the time. But interesting about the possibility of like restructuring for the team and how the different ways you could do it, right? So you're still getting your money, but if you want, if you want to be on this team long term, he might be open to do it. And it was interesting when, there was those trade rumors from certain fans, and then all of a sudden the Dallas game happens, a few other games. But you and me have sat here and been like, the offense should be running through this guy. Why should we wait for the Dallas Cowboy game for a lot of fans? And obviously Dan knows the talents of DK, but a lot of other fans that were calling for this guy, or any excuse they could make up, like, oh, DK got a little hot headed here, ship him out of Seattle. Man, some people do not realize the value of this dude as a number one. And like I said, when you get the right coordinator, and that's why we're waiting. We're waiting to see who this OC is to really take this guy to the next level, right? But the whole restructure thing was really interesting.
No, and here's my thing. I think it's going to be really eye-opening for Seattle fans. Whoever this new OC is, you got to think in a lot of ways. There was a couple keywords that MacDonald used in his press conference that made me go like, they're going to feed DK the ball. Like, him and JSN now are going to be vital parts more than they were under Waldron. One being, he wants a physical and explosive offense. Well, those are two words that we all have put with DK. He's physical and he's explosive. The other thing too is, we're going to build this offense around our best players. DK Metcalf is our best wide receiver. He's our best passing option. Build the offense into him. And I look at, like, if Ryan Grubb ends up being the OC, you look at how he used Roma Dunze this year for Washington and the way he schemed that guy open. He's got a similar skill set to a DK Metcalf, big physical receiver, but Rome was running wide open all over the field. And all I can picture in my head is seeing number 14 running by himself across the field.
Man.
And we're hitting him 30 yards down the field with big plays. So it got me really excited. And the thing is the one thing I'm starting to understand with our Seahawks community and the guests that we keep having on the show is that our community of Seahawks fans really were looking for a change.
Yep.
And this has now really started to help with getting that stagnant energy out of Seattle and out of the Seattle fan base. Like, I feel like if we still had Pete Carroll, and yes, if they had made coordinator changes, I don't think they would be anything that, like, we've seen. Leslie Frazier would not have all of a sudden come into Seattle and been the assistant head coach to Pete Carroll. Like, that's not happening. Mike MacDonald, though, as you can tell already, it's not about me. It's about this team. It's about winning. It's about building the best culture going forward. Making a hire of Leslie Frazier's caliber on that roster, like, I don't think people realize, minus if we get Ryan Grubb and we get some other wicked coaches on the staff, that single-handedly may be the most important coaching hire of this.
Yeah, exactly. And you touch on Mike and how you bring in a Leslie Frazier. So you mentioned to your point, doing what's best for this team, not necessarily, and obviously it's going to benefit Mike MacDonald, but and especially another thing that Mike said in his press was that somebody will eventually take over this play calling. So you kind of see, like, everybody at that level's got a certain level of ego to a point, but not some overinflated ego like I'm the play caller and I'm going to continue to be the play caller no matter who walks through this door, who comes in with what experience. But I whatever needs to be done for the better of this team, then I will do. And if I believe right now it's me making the play calls because I am a good coordinator, then fine. But bringing in a guy like Frazier is huge. And like you said, it wouldn't have happened under the Pete regime because that's a whole nother regime. You have this new regime that people are excited about. Like Dan said, John said that a coach should have a 10-year shelf life. So as much as we love Pete, I don't care who you are, you're gonna eventually, that shelf life, it's expiring. And that is why it was long overdue. I don't care if you're Pete or Bill Belichick or Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. You can make the argument that his shelf life is run its course. The only thing that people bring up is like, this guy's had a winning season how many years in a row? Well, yeah, there's pros and cons to that because that'll continue. You'll keep your job, but is that a good thing? And that was what we were worried about going 9-8 this year, like you touched on. Hey, I kind of want to, as much as I don't really want to lose games because I love my Seahawks in the short term, it's going to be better for the team. And fortunately, Jody and John didn't really look at those wins. They looked past those wins and said, no, listen, it's time. And now you got Mike in here, and it's just like you said, the community is just, they're excited for this new chapter. And like Dan said, this is such an exciting time of the year that sometimes I get more excited than the actual season when I'm breaking things down. And I tend to agree. Like, we love the season. Like, it's football. But you're breaking down games, you're doing this, you're doing that, which is all good. But this is when you can really dissect things and really kind of, how's this team gonna look and what pieces we're bringing in here. So I agree with a lot of the stuff you said today. It was really, really good stuff.
No, 100%. And, I tend to agree with Dan. Like, for us as, podcasters and running the show, like, this is our first chance to actually get to go through the off season. And one thing I love to do is I love to listen to the pods more in the off season than I do during the year because it's like you said, it's the same repetitive thing. We're previewing a game, we're doing a post game show, and if there's news in between, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But this also allows us to, talk to the rest of the Seahawks community so our listeners can get more insight from everyone's opinion on which direction of the draft, free agency, whatever the Seahawks should do. There's more conversation around it, which for me, I enjoy a lot more. I love listening to all of our different guests come on and hear their, takes on which way the team should go in the draft or whatever. And, one thing we're going to do for our listeners is we're going to do the same thing Dan did. We're going to have a mock draft pre free agency, post free agency, and then just before the draft, just to give you guys an insight of where we think the Hawks may go with some things. Just on a couple coaching notes with the Hawks, though, that have come across my Twitter feed here. Joe Cullen is in the running for the defensive coordinator position with the Hawks. He's currently the D-line coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, but he's got quite the backtracking record for defensive coordinator positions. He's been coaching since the 90s, about 56 years old, but he was with Detroit from 2006 to 2008. He's a D-line specialist. That's where he kind of makes his hay, which I think would be great for us here because I know Anthony Weaver was kind of in the running for the job here after Mike MacDonald left and came here, and he was a D-line coach. But he was with Baltimore 2016 to 2020. So he was there for 4 years as their D-line coach, and we know Baltimore's track record with defensive coaches. He went to Jacksonville, was there for their 1 year, I believe, under Urban Meyer, and he's been with Kansas City as the D-line coach for the last 2 years there, and that D-line's been quite good. So yeah, I think that would be an interesting hire. On another note, though, apparently Big Dog Energy, which is a guy that comments and knows a lot about the University of Washington and what goes on with them, just recently put out on his Twitter feed that, and this isn't sourced, so listeners don't take this, this is just someone that I've followed for a while. He's pretty accurate with this stuff. Ryan Grubb, the key assistant on Kalen DeBoer's coaching staff at Alabama, is said to have had several virtual meetings with the Seahawks about becoming their next offensive coordinator. It is expected that he will be offered and will accept the position in the coming days. So it might be later today, it could be tomorrow or Tuesday, but I think with Kafka getting blocked yesterday by the Giants, and as we said with Tanner Instring from the Lions possibly being next year their OC, I think it kind of dwindles away some of the opportunities for these coaches. And I think it kind of makes it a lot easier for Ryan Grubb to be the guy. And like I said earlier, when we were talking down, I feel Ryan Grubb possibly is a guy that's going to be here for 4 years
Right.
before he goes off and becomes a head coach because of his not lack of experience, but in theory, yes, lack of experience at the NFL level. I think a lot of people want to see him do it for a couple of years as an OC before they turn around and offer him a job just because he hasn't been an NFL coach prior to this opportunity that he clearly is going to get offered by Seattle.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on that real quick. I think that'd be a great fit, obviously. And then your DC, okay, we're not as worried because Mike's taking control of that right now. You got Leslie in there. If you had Ryan Grubb, that's a great start. And here's the other thing, guys, like you said, guys get worried, okay, if they're going to get poached and this and that. But you know what? That just means, you're doing something right. And not only that, if say Ryan Grubb gets poached in 3 years even, well, then you're kind of confident that Mike MacDonald knows how to find a good coordinator. And you know what? Let's go get another one. And that means you're on the right track. You're winning football games. That's a good problem to have. Whereas like I said, I'm not knocking him, but man, it sure was kind of hard to find a good OC in Seattle. You kind of fire one and you fire another one, and the last guy was probably going to get fired, and he just took another job. So, you know what? Getting poached isn't always a bad thing because then hey, your guy knows how to pick them, right? So that's kind of what I'll say to that.
Well, and I think, John Schneider is going to be heavily involved, and I think that's
Right.
where the Leslie Frazier hire came in.
Mm.
And I think it's going to be interesting because I really think we're going to see a very different John Schneider,
Yeah, it's
a
exciting.
very different direction of this organization where I think honestly, and Dan kind of alluded to it too, of how much he even said he didn't think Jamal Adams happens if it's just John Schneider calling the shots. And that's where I look at a lot of guys on our roster, Bobby Wagner, Will Dissly, a lot of the guys we listed off, Nick Bellore, they're Pete Carroll guys. Like they've always been Pete Carroll.
Right.
I don't think we're going to see that anymore. I think it's truly going to go back to what a lot of the LOB originally talked about in the first era of Pete, which was we're competing every day. We're going to put the best guys out there. It's going to be the best guys play, and we're just constantly going to be in a set state of competition. I think Pete somehow lost that along the way, and it started to become more of well, this is my guy, and I trust him. And
Yeah.
like, I look at Bobby. I don't think John Schneider wanted to bring Bobby Wagner
Mm.
back.
No.
He didn't. I
No.
think he was okay, and they would have been fine going in a different direction last year. Pete wanted hey, let's get this done. Let's get Bobby done. And now Bobby Wagner is back. And that's nothing against Bobby, but I even as a fan look at Bobby Wagner and go, is he really someone that we need on this roster?
No.
Yes, he has some leadership, but I think there's a point where you look at guys like a Tyler Lockett and a Bobby Wagner, and it's nothing against those two individuals, but they're Pete guys. I don't know if they want that in the building anymore. In that regard, where it's going to be hey, when we used to have team meetings, we used to shoot the basketball and do these
Yeah,
things because
yeah.
that's what Pete did. And, those type of things. I don't know if they want to have that where there's going to be that butting of heads between Wagner and them going, well, the locker room still thinks we should do this.
Right.
And Mike MacDonald's over here going, well, that's what you used to do. This is
This
the
is
direction
how.
I want to go with,
Yeah.
we dialed in, we're focused, we're that. You can still have it as fun. And that's where for me, I'd rather see Tyler retire. I'd rather
Right.
see Bobby maybe retire, or yeah, you know what, Bobby, if you're gonna go play somewhere else, go play somewhere else. But I don't know if anyone's gonna be banging down the door for Bobby Wagner.
Well,
Yes, he led
they
the
weren't last year.
no, they weren't. And
Right.
yes, he led the NFL in tackles, but that's a misleading
Misleading.
stat.
No. No, absolutely. And we both agree with that. And I think you're right, man. Like you sort of got to like people talk about the culture. Rob Staten said, "What culture?" I mean, it's been not the defense has been bad, So all this other kind of stuff, like we talk about, we like the fact that we could see some new discipline kind of brought in this building and just a different way of doing things, right? Doesn't mean things can't be loose at times and this and that, but something when we all knew it had to change. So you're right, a couple of those guys, and it's not like Bobby is putting up efficiency at the position right now. So, and like you said, throw those stats out the window because they are misleading. And Tyler, we love him. He's a Seahawk Hall of Famer and a great dude. But if he hung him up, I don't think, I hate to say it, I don't know if this offense misses a beat. I think we can fill his role and kind of get showcase the guys that we mentioned and have the offense go through them, a DK, a JSN, his second season. And that's how I sort of look at that because yeah, you're a peak guy and you're making a lot of money. So it'll be interesting, man. But man, just exciting stuff. Like you said, you're on Twitter and just things are swirling every few minutes, with coaching, and it's just an exciting time. We've had Senior Bowl, mock drafts are starting to slowly roll in. So man, we got a lot of stuff, guys. So you know what? Like, subscribe to the channel, guys. Hit the notification button, and it just goes a long way for us, man. We love bringing you guys this content, uh, and yeah, we're gonna keep coming at you here in the coming weeks. We got a lot of stuff, a lot of good guests coming up. So yeah, we're gonna get out of here for today and go Hawks.
Yeah, guys, like Armac said, lots of good stuff's coming up. We're gonna have a few new guests come on. We're gonna have a mock draft. Please comment on our YouTube page. We love interacting with you guys. We love answering questions. We love it. Even we'll bring questions onto the show from the comment section if you guys post them in there. But yeah, please like, subscribe to the show. It helps us. It helps us get more guests on the show. So yeah, at the end of it, go Hawks, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
All right, later.